everyone. I see some people wearing AMP t-shirts. That's really nice. I'm Yusuke from Mobile Solutions team in Google. Today, I'd like to talk to you about building beautiful interactive AMP pages with your e-commerce websites. AMP stands for Accelerated Mobile Pages, and it's an open source technology to make your website really, really fast. First of all, by show of hands, how many of you have actually visited an AMP page before? No one? Really? Then how about, is there anyone that built an AMP page before? Developed, actually. Is there anyone here? Okay, so you guys are pretty new to this technology. That's good. AMP is a great solution for all web users, so please consider developing them, not just reading them. Before we get into details, let's step back and think about why we need AMPs. Users typically want fast loading pages, right? We all want that, but they aren't really getting fast. It takes a mobile web page an average of 19 seconds to load on a 3G network. That's really bad for everyone. And for every 1 second delay in page load time, conversion dropped by 7%, which is very bad for business as well. So page speed really matters for a lot of us, and even though web has great reach, it currently does not meet users' expectations, and we really want to fix that. So this is where AMP comes in. If you have an AMP page, it will load your web page under 1 second. This means your content will be instantly delivering to your user, which is a great experience for everyone. From last year's data, the median speed of AMP was 700 milliseconds in first meaningful paint. The more interesting thing is, this year's AMP team's OKR, which is the goal that we want to achieve, is twice faster AMP pages. We want it to be 400 milliseconds. That is 0.4 seconds. So AMP is super fast. It's already fast, but it's even becoming more and more faster. Then I want to talk to you a little bit about why is AMP so fast? Why is it fast? It's because it's built on 3 core components that makes the website fast. First of all, AMP restricts anti-patterns that makes your website slow. By using AMP HTML and AMP.js, which is the framework AMP provides, you'll be able to build a naturally fast web pages with all the web best practices baked in already. And next, AMP even provides the infrastructure. If you have a valid AMP page, you will also be able to host your AMP page on an AMP cache, which is the free CDN that everyone could use. So this is why AMPs are so fast. But it is true that when AMP started, it was limited to what it could do, and it supported primary news publishers and blogs, which are static and simple. You guys have seen all these websites, right? But during last year and this year, 2017, everything is so different. AMP has introduced components that make it easy to adapt to an e-commerce websites, and we already have a lot of examples that we want to show you. For example, Singapore-based Wego.com is the largest travel marketplace in Middle East and Asia Pacific. They've created AMP pages on their key landing pages and found out that conversion rates to partner sites went up to 95%. That's doubling. And search and conversion rates improved by 49%, which validated their effort. We've really seen these kind of stories on a lot of publishers, and we keep having more and more stories like these. And we've actually seen adoption increase in a lot of e-commerce websites. I indeed support a lot of partners in Japan and APAC, but many of my partners adapt to AMP every month. Today, I am going to show which AMP components are available to build beautiful and interactive AMP pages. And to do that, AMP by Example, which is an official AMP website, is very much useful. You can check all the components that AMP provides, and you can see how to implement them, and you can check even how the look and feel is like. Let's go through what it has there. Starting with a product browse page or product category page, whatever you want to call it, this funnel is a good use case for making good experience in AMP. For these pages, they're typically, let me just check if the animation is moving. Oh, so it seems to be moving correctly. Good, cool. So, and typically this is a promotion slider like the one is shown now. So it's now showing so healthy, and it's gonna move to the 10 best apples. We can use AMP carousel to implement this. If we want to implement these types of animation sliders, typically what we did was to choose some third-party JavaScript libraries from hundreds of options in the web, and we don't even know that if it's going to perform well, right? In AMP, you don't have to do that. The slider effect is baked into AMP. By having custom AMP carousel element and setting layout, responsive, type slides, and a autoplay attribute, AMP will automatically generate a slider effect for you. This is super easy. And what about searching for products? In this case, I think this page is searching for apples. Don't worry, we can use forms in AMPs. By using AMP form, we can implement a get form request like this, or even a post form request. Especially for GET requests, we have the option of using asynchronous and synchronous HTTP requests, so you can have a very, very flexible implementation of yours. Now, let's move forward to the product page. This is the most common funnel to be amped, and there are many, many components that we could use. Unlike the one that I showed you before, for these types of pages, we might be having multiple images by different colors and let the user actually decide which image to be shown. By actually clicking the left and right arrows, that might be the things that we want to do. Even for this case, AMP carousel plays a role. The difference here is just deleting the autoplay attribute. If you want the left and right arrow button to be there, to be shown all the time, you can do that by adding controls attribute. You can even style the buttons with CSS, so please make it beautiful as you like. And how about showing detailed descriptions, specs, and size information with tabs? We all want to do this, right? Please use AMP selector for this use case. AMP selector is just like input type radio or input type checkbox. It saves the component state for multiple options and will be able to operate the nearby DOMs. For the tab example, it switches the display status by selected tab using CSS. You can see that by the code. Now, this feature is very new and very awesome one. AMP can handle payment request APIs. Payment request API is a newly standardized web feature where a browser actually provides a payment form itself. With using this API, we can show names and shipping addresses that users has already saved in the browser. And if you were using an Android device, we can even use the credit card information saved in the Play Store by default. Which means that user will be landing instantly on your AMP pages, and with just a few taps away, users can actually purchase your product. This payment request API is pure awesome, and it will really empower your AMP pages. The implementation in AMP side is very simple. Add allow payment request attribute to the AMP iframe, and set the external HTML URL, which has to include the buttons and all the payment request API implementations, to the source attribute. Users should love easier payment, and I love it too. This feature makes AMP page even more powerful. This will be the last example, but I get asked many, many times that AMPs are only for static contents, right? Wrong. For example, related products, which is shown on the slide right now, and even like recommendation or personalization is possible using AMP list. This figure is describing how AMP works in general in a very, very simple way. On your right-hand side, there's your own server, which will pass the AMP page to the middle, which is the AMP cache, which is a CDN. The AMP cache will then hand over the cache page to the user's device on the left. So by only looking at this figure, it makes sense that people confuses that AMP can only handle static pages. Oops. So here comes AMP list. AMP list will give you the power to communicate directly with your web server without the AMP cache in the middle. So like prices and stocks, which is like very much sensitive information with freshness, could leverage this component to fetch real-time data using your own JSON endpoint. Next slide. Okay, cool. It is very intuitive to implement this. Add your own endpoint URI in the source attribute at the AMP list element. And it's not moving. And use a response data in the mesh-js style template. I make many demos of AMP, but it's so easy to use and I love it. I would definitely evaluate AMP as A+ framework with all the things that AMP can do, with the things that I just shown you. But what if it happens when we want to develop a highly interactive, highly custom interactive page? For example, what if we want to change the image based on which thumbnail user selects, like this one? Or if we have to handle multiple colors, changing the image by selected colors should be a good experience. We see this in a lot of websites, right? Or even change the text of price by selected colors. This should be a valid implementation. And how about adding show more button, where you can control what to show and what not based on user interaction? Come to think about it, when we develop a web page, we want to do many things. Then how should we implement these kind of interactiveness in AMP pages? We can't write our own custom JavaScript, so we can't really listen to event handlers that we do in general web pages. What could be the solution here? The answer is this one component, AMP bind. Please remember this component when you leave. This is extremely useful, and this is a very new one. Here we go. So let me get into details of AMP bind. When talking about custom interactivity that I just showed you in AMP pages, to be honest, what kind of options do you think we have? Using AMP iframe is pretty straightforward, right? There's no limitations on the content that you develop. You can use any JavaScript that you want, but come to think about it, iframe is just so slow, and we always build a poor, slow implementation. It doesn't even really make sense for AMPs. Obviously, this is not the best way. Then what about building your own AMP components that lets you do what you want to do? Like doing a pull request on AMP HTML GitHub project, that might be fun. Contributing to open source projects are always fun and exciting, but isn't this just too much work? Besides, components should be built for generic use cases, not for specific ones that no one really uses except you. So in these cases, use AMP bind. If you want custom interactivity, go for AMP bind. If you have something in your mind, but you couldn't really find anything in AMP by example, go for AMP bind. It will help you out in most of the cases. AMP bind is a new component that supports custom interactivity with data binding and expressions like string operation or comparison operator or ternary operator. So how does AMP bind work? We need 3 steps. First, we give the state to the page. Next, we bind the expression to the DOM element. Lastly, mutation. Create a trigger to change the state of the page. Now let's look into the codes and see what's happening. The first one is state. Using AMP bind, you will be able to define a JSON-style data structure in AMP state. In this case, let's see. We have a namespace called foo with ID equals foo, an object with bar equals welcome to. I think you can get this from this picture. The next step is data binding. Let's think of having a p tag text object with having hello world as a default value, and we want to change the text by state of the page. In this case, surround a bracket to the text attribute and say, in this case, the value would be foo.bar plus baz. I think you get it, but foo.bar is a value that we have just defined in the previous slide in the AMP state. And there's now a new variable called baz here. The last part is mutation. Let's say we have a button and make the variable baz change whenever the user clicks on a button. Say we want the value to be changed as, let's say, Google for mobile. On tap, in this case, means when you tap. AMP set state is for changing the state in the pages. By implementing all these, you can now see on the screen that the string hello world instantly changed to welcome to Google Mobile when the user clicks on say welcome button. Like in this case, AMP bind lets you change other objects attribute by changing with user interaction. It's highly customizable. Let's go back to the example I showed you before, the product page example. And keep in mind these three steps: state, binding, and mutation. We first will make a JSON state with AMP state describing how each product's price changed by colors and size. For the ones that I'm showing on the screen, let's see. Green apples M size is $5.99. Golden apples M size is $9.99. And red apples M size is $7.99. And I think you can get that from this screen. Now let's add a bracket with text attribute in span tag in this case, which should be displaying the price. As a value, we are setting a price of a given color based on this selected color variable. This is a new variable. Finally, with AMP selector, create an option having colors as a value, and when the user selects on the option, dynamically change the value of selected color variable. By doing this and a little bit of styling, we can bind the color and the price. You can get the codes at bit.ly/amp-apple, so please check after you leave this session. Today, I'd like to show you a very powerful way of using AMP bind. By binding with the component that I previously talked about, AMP list, which is the component that is able to fetch external data real time, you'll be able to create a page where it fetches real-time data each time user interacts with your web page. By doing this, you'll be able to develop something like this. Is it showing on the screen? Yes, it is. Sorting the products by a user click. Price high to low, price low to high, or maybe filters might be really good. In this case, this page is dynamically filtering with colors, say orange, and the next one should be green. And the good news is AMPs can even listen to key events now. By listening to key events, you'll be able to create an auto-suggesting feature just like this one. It should definitely benefit our users in something like product search. The way to build this is the same as before. Bind an expression to source attribute with brackets. We can see that this expression in using the ternary operator to determine the query string parameter. Let's see. If the variable foo is undefined, set the parameter value to sort default. If we can see the value which is valid in the variable, set the parameter to the value of foo. This is what is describing on the screen. And with a tap event, which will happen to AMP selector in this case, dynamically set the variable foo to the selected sort condition. This will re-trigger the AMP list data fetch. We can think of so many use cases using this combination. For example, maybe in AMP page, you might want to do a dynamic postal code search, address search, or if you're owning an online travel website, dynamically display the flights by changing the conditions might be a good use case for a lot of users. This is an awesome feature, so everyone should definitely look into this combination. And speaking of combination, AMP goes really, really well with PWAs, and it's even recommended. We can do many things with AMP, as I described, but you have to never forget, we are forced to restrict it to AMP HTML and AMP.js. This is actually my son on the screen, and he's crying and tells me that, Daddy, I cannot write my JavaScript in the AMP page. Or, Daddy, if I serve my AMP page from cache, service workers won't work, or push notifications won't work, and even I cannot add my website to my home screen. This poor boy really someone needs to help him out. Let's first see the difference between AMP and PWA. I would say that AMP is super optimized to the first page load. It's super quickly loading web page. On the other hand, PWA has access to cool new web APIs, but it's not always fast in the first visit. This definitely depends on how you develop your web page, but in general, think of an app. Apps always need time to download the resource to initiate the app, right? PWA also has those kind of overheads in the beginning. But in users' perspective, in our perspective, we want the page to load fast, and even if we navigate to the next page, we want the page to stay fast, right? So start fast and stay fast is the keyword here. To make that happen, we can leverage this one AMP component. It's called AMP install service workers. By using this feature, we can pre-cache the next page while in AMP page. 3 steps to explain this. First, user will discover your AMP page and maybe Google search and land on your content instantly. And while users reading through your AMP page, start caching the next page in the background. And finally, when the user clicks on some kind of links in your page and navigates your PWA page, everything will start instantly because you already have a local cache that was just pre-cached within AMP pages. Very simple implementation on the AMP side. If the page was served from your own domain, use the source attribute to directly install service workers, SWJS in this case. If the page was served from AMP cache, we cannot directly, unfortunately, we cannot directly install service workers, so we are going to use an iframe. Use data iframe source attribute to load service workers from an iframe. Rakuten Recipe, which is a Japanese restaurant recipe service, is using this method and actually improving the user's experience. First, user searches some recipes on Google search. In this case, maybe we want to search how to cook a miso soup. Next, while the user is checking how to cook a miso soup, start downloading the next page. Once the user navigates to another page, it will load the page from local cache, which is an instant experience. Rakuten Recipe has improved their KPIs by using this technique. They have seen 15% improvement in time spent per user and 3.6 higher CTR within AMP pages, which is really awesome, isn't it? And for each PWA features like add to home screen and push notifications, they're seeing great numbers, which proves the power of PWAs. So please, for those of you who are here, when you go back, I hope that you start building your interactive and beautiful AMP pages, but don't just stop there. Please challenge developing PWAs and make the web a better place for all to live. I'm now running out of time, so I'm going to wrap up the session. I've talked about many cool features and interactive features in AMP today. AMP is really great, I love it, but it's constantly evolving. There are new things going on every day. So let me share you what features are coming to the world soon. I've explained about the strong combination of AMP list and AMP bind and do some sorts and filters. But even in this case, we're doing network requests and do some searches on the server side. So there's always a computing overhead. So AMP team is now developing AMP sort and AMP filter, which lets you sort the content within your client side. The real-time data fetch feature will become even more powerful and customizable. And this is very good news for all the designers. And AMP will be able to listen to scroll events as well, like scroll-dependent header or scroll back to top experience. So AMP is changing every day to make the web experience better. So please try these out, and hopefully, if you're an engineer, contribute to the world's best open source project. So that's all for this session. Thank you so much.